Hi, my name is Chris, aka The Philosopher's Games, or TPhGames as my little games channel here is called, and today we look a bit into the GTA 6 trailer that kind of just released and mainly focus on the graphical details of that trailer. I can already tell you in advance, it looks very impressive. For people wondering why the trailer's already out, as far as I understood it, it leaked somewhere and then Rockstar decided to release it earlier. In the first scene of the trailer, we see this beautiful vista with, I assume, Vice City in the background, and of course it's Florida inspired, as you're probably aware. And if you've ever seen like a postcard of Florida or something like that from the 90s, it would look something like this. It is a very iconic and definitely gets you into the mood of this scene. In the water we see a lot of reflections, even these two pylons there in the background, we can at least see the reflection of one of them, the other is kind of obscured by the bridge, but yeah, also the shadows of the cars and so on, a lot of detail, looks pretty good. Another cool detail is that in this scene, and I guess people would kind of expect that, but it's definitely noteworthy, the boat is deforming the water, so it makes waves while driving through it. That is pretty cool, even at this distance. It looks pretty realistic and also adds to all the detail we see in all these scenes here in the trailer. For example, here in this we also see some birds sitting on the power supply line, just adding additional detail. There's so many things you can look at and find some interesting detail. So yeah, visually very impressive. The car also casts lights on the ground and so on, though it seems like they're not that sophisticated, at least at this distance. The reflections look like ray-traced reflections, and I assume they will make good use of this technology to create this impressive look here. Also, there's a prison in the background, which might be interesting in context of the other scenes we see in the trailer, but we might come to this in a moment. One thing that is though very noteworthy is that this scene only runs at 24 FPS. And first I thought, okay, maybe the trailer was rendered in 24 FPS, but the second half of the trailer runs in 30 FPS. I made the effort and counted the frames. That is very interesting to see. I don't know why that is, and it's far too early to talk about potential performance and stuff. It comes out 2025. A lot of things can change until then. I just found it unusual. Maybe it's a hint that this was recorded on a different build or something. In the next scene, it kind of intensifies a little bit. I noticed it while watching the trailer for the first time. So is this stuttering? And it definitely dips here below 24 FPS. It's then only 22 or 23. It's very interesting to see. I assume something with a fence is kind of killing the performance a little bit, or it's just a very old build and they didn't have certain optimizations available yet. As said, this is potentially more like recorded on a different build, I assume. Then we finally see one of the two protagonists of GTA 6, Lucia. And she's in prison. We mentioned the prison in the other scene. We saw it in the distance. Now we, I assume, are inside. And we have the first few scenes with her. What is very impressive is definitely the detail in her face, like the sun highlights it. It looks very realistic, and there are not many games out there on this level, so that is insanely impressive already, especially the hair and how the different strains of hair cast shadows and so on. It's just really realistically looking. Very impressive already. Then we have the scene with Lucia, and I think it's called Prison Counselor, and it just continues. We see the impressive details on the face. The hair looks, as said, again, really, really good, especially in the light. And keep in mind, in videos where you look at graphical details, they're often a bit pedantic. For example, if I would criticize something, or something I noticed definitely, is the printer and what you call it, the cabinet below it. If you look at the shadows, they seem a little bit off, I think. But I guess that would be a detail that could only be fixed with something like path tracing. We have seen this in Cyberpunk as well, that in some cases, in the background somewhere, or in some dark corners where not all the work of the developers went in, we sometimes see these shadows being a little bit off or hard-baked just to save some performance. And here, like in this case, it seems it's not 100% correct there. You can also notice that in some of these scenes there are some dust particles in the air, which I kind of like. It adds a little bit to the scene and a little bit to the atmosphere of these. That also makes light more, let's call it, perceptible. Like you can grasp it better, and it becomes also more present in a scene. So that I really like, especially like when you have light cones and stuff like that. And that makes complete sense because the lighting in this game is just so impressive and so present all the time. So adding little details like this to highlight it even more is, I think, a very smart move. Then we have the next impressive scene. We see the camera flying over the water or the ocean and see even some, I think, dolphins and even some sharks there, some birds flying. And then we see the beach of Vice City and the city itself in the background. And it's just visually a very stunning shot, full of detail. I think it's very impressive. I really tried to find something popping in the distance, maybe some shadow or so, but nothing. It's very impressive. Though it seems not all objects are casting shadows. You might find a palm tree somewhere in the distance that is obscured by a lot of things that might not cast a shadow there, but that is to be expected to really save some performance. And I have to admit, it's just very impressive. Even the LOD transitions are very smooth, it seems. That is also no big surprise, but still important to point out, in my opinion. For example, if you look at the palm trees on the top of this middle building there, the model of the palm tree should change over time into different variants and different quality of it. And if you do it very well, you don't see these transitions. And here it's very hard to see. I'm not even sure if it does. So good job there. LOD means level of detail. It's like a technique that is used to save performance, because in a far distance, you don't need an object at the maximum quality. So you create other versions of it in lower quality and load them in the closer you get and the more detail you need. And if you do this very well, you don't see the transitions between that. This is of course nothing new and from a big game like GTA 6 to be expected, but also we have this shot with so much view distance and still it's hard to make out any inconsistencies or anything, even if you zoom in. That is very impressive. The scene here runs at 24 FPS like all the scenes before, except for that one with a fence. And what is noteworthy here is that it's very blurry. That might be due to motion blur activated, but it could also be that the scene is rendered at a low resolution here, because I could imagine that a shot like this eats just a lot of performance, and I'm very curious how this will run at the end on consoles. I think the only thing that might pop in here is also this little sand dust trail these vehicles leave behind. When you get closer, you see suddenly it appears, and if you stop very early, you see it's not there, I think. Even the helicopter casts a shadow and the birds as well. Just a very impressive scene full of detail. Then we skip like ahead a few scenes. We have this beautiful airboat scene. And then this scene is interesting, the one with the flamingos. We see the reflections of the flamingos in the water. So ray traced reflections, I would call that. Of course, the surface of the water also scatters the light a little bit different. That's also pretty nice to see. And what you also notice is that even the flamingos, when getting out of the water, also kind of deform the water a little bit. Though it could also be it's just particles that we see here, but definitely it looks very realistic in this shot. If we look at the background, we though see that not all the animals here in the water cast reflections in it. So there seems to be like a view distance limit to this, which of course makes sense because stuff like this is always very expensive. I would also say this level of detail for nature shots is not unusual for Rockstar. We've seen in Red Dead Redemption 2 already how much effort they put in some details there. So no surprise to see a shot like this and also looking absolutely fantastic. Next we see the scene here on the beach, and what is impressive here is just the crowd density, I would call it. We see a lot of high-level detailed characters here standing around, and they all cast shadows. Some even have reflections and so on. We have the water, which also looks very nice. And some people, if you look at them, you question, what are you doing there exactly? But I guess that's just the classical Rockstar humor when it comes to that. Another noticeable detail for sure is that the people walking through the sand are also having sand on their feet. It's just very impressive how much detail there is. I also like this little dog of the two joggers. Also, if you look at the buildings in the distance, you see heat flickering in the air, which is also pretty cool. In the next scene we see several boats, maybe it's a race or a chase or something like that. Wouldn't be unusual for GTA. And if we look at the water, we can definitely see it at the boat on the left side, that it deforms the water and creates some waves in the water, and in general just looks very good, especially with the particle effects and so on. You can also see little hints of the ground below the water surface and so on, and some reflections as well. It's just very nice looking. In the next scene we see, I think, Lucia and potentially the other protagonist, Jason, in a sports car driving around. They are being filmed from somebody looking outside of another sports car. We also see some location names here on these signs up there. What is very noticeable here is that on this black part of their sports car, you see a reflection of, let's call it a pylon there in the background, and you see it multiple times after each other, and I think that's ghosting there in the reflections. That is not too unusual when you have ray-traced reflections. For example, in Cyberpunk 2077, you can also see, if you see an object in a reflection moving very fast, that you have these ghosting effects. And there you can, since I think 2.0, activate ray reconstruction, which is an Nvidia technology, and this diminishes this effect. It also makes the reflections look better and more crisp. For example, here in this scene, you also see that the reflections on the car have a lot of noise, so there's these little pixelated edges of it. And that, I guess, could also be fixed with this. PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series don't have an Nvidia GPU, so they don't have access to ray reconstruction. Next we have another scene, I think from a car perspective. We see a lot of people standing on the right side, a lot of detail, a lot of cars left and right. Very nice to see this at daylight. And what is noticeable is that the cars have shadows below them in this light situation. I remember in Cyberpunk 2077, with ray tracing activated, the shadows below the cars weren't always correct, or sometimes even not there, and with path tracing this was then fixed at some point. So it seems here in this game they really focus on to have these shadows below the cars. They might not always be 100% correct, if I'm completely honest, but it's enough for the illusion, and of course we have to look out for this in different light situations as well. In the next scene we are inside, I assume, a strip club. One, for example, also existed in GTA Vice City, so I'm not surprised to see one here. What is noticeable is these two women carrying these fireworks. If this would be path traced, I think these fireworks would definitely change the lighting in the room quite a bit, especially towards the ceiling and so on, and towards some of the characters standing around them. But we only get these lens flare effects, so this is of course not path trace. Would be far too expensive for consoles and for most PCs as well. So that is not the case. Curious what will happen when, I don't know, in the far distant future the PC version drops. Maybe they also add path tracing. That would be pretty cool to see, to be honest. But yeah, that is definitely one of those indicators where you notice that not all the light sources for the ray tracing and so on are considered. Still, there's a lot of detail, and if you look down there, there's a bottle standing, and we have later other scenes with bottles standing around somewhere, and I have to admit, those look really realistic and good in this game. In the next scene, we see two characters greeting each other, and the detail on them is very impressive, I have to admit again. Like, they look very realistic, animations and so on, just really impressive. But we already noticed this in previous scenes. Then we have like another very impressive wide shot with a lot of view distance from Vice City, and here we also see tons of details, of course, but we also see some limitations here and there, I think. For example, some of the boats in the distance suddenly don't have reflections anymore, which is then again different for the boats more in the foreground and so on. But that is to be expected, to be honest. They have to save some performance here. I'm not 100% if some of the reflections of the buildings in the backgrounds are always correct in the water. There's one there at the side with a little gap in it that looks a little bit off, to be honest. Also, these trees here at the center right, I'm not 100% sure if they are really reflected correctly in the water. And if you look at the buildings in the background, It seems like at least the lights in the windows are not reflected all the time, or not correctly reflected. So it seemed at some point in the background the trickery starts to kind of save performance, and that is to be expected, but you have to look out for those little details, and it's really impressive looking, I have to admit. It also seems some smaller objects in the water, like this little boy here in the distance, have also no reflection, but at this distance that is not surprising. This scene here is also very nice looking, but it also reveals some interesting details. For example, we talked about the shadows below the cars. If you look here, they are mostly gone, so they don't seem really correct. And the reason for that might be that there is some headlight of a car outside of the screen shining into the scene along the street and removes those shadows. However, then it should create new shadows. It seems like though this headlight has of course no dynamic lighting, so it does not create these shadow dynamically, which is not a big surprise. It's a dynamic light source, but nonetheless interesting to see. However, even the cars further in the distance suddenly don't have the correct shadow below them anymore, which I find a little bit surprising. Some more in the foreground look completely fine, but those more in the background look, as far as we can see them at least, a little bit off, to be honest. But that's just, as said, very nitpicky. Still a very beautiful scene that really feels alive, with a lot of people walking around and tons of detail again. We skip the next scene in the club where people are dancing and move again to this wide shot where we see a lot of landscape. What is very noticeable in this scene is that even though we are so far away, we see still a lot of these little cars down there casting shadows. So that's pretty impressive. But at some point the shadows and also some of the reflections stop. For example, if you look at some of the boats in the very far distance, it seems like they don't have that. But of course, at this distance, they don't really need it to be kind of convincing anymore. Still, if you look out for it, you might notice it. Also, is this an airship there or a balloon or something there in the background? Really hard to tell. But it casts a shadow as far as I can see, so that is also impressive, maybe because it's such a big object. Also, these two cars there at the bottom left, maybe it's just me, but it looks a bit like the shadows are not cast correctly there for whatever reason. It might have to do with them driving in a bend that makes it appear to be a bit off, and it's not in reality. I'm not 100% sure. We also see that the boats also have these little waves in the water, but at the very distance this then completely vanishes. Still, it's impressive how much view distance there is and how much details are preserved at these high distances still. It also seems that above the island on the top right there is a cloud, and that casts a shadow on it because it's a bit darker compared to the other sections around it. So also cloud shadows are a thing, it seems. Also, we are now in the part of the trailer where the frame rate gets better. Now we don't have 24 FPS anymore, we are here at 29, and in the following scene with a woman in the bikini we also got full 30 FPS, I think. So that is interesting to see that the frame rate there changes. And in this shot with the landscape and also with a woman standing on the building in the bikini, you also have like a view distance in the background. So it's kind of surprising that there it's better. As said, it could be a different build or something. It could of course also be that they just recorded the previous clips by accident or whatever reason at 24 FPS and later switched the recording setting to 30. Who knows? Let us skip a bit ahead and look at this scene here, which I also found very interesting with the cars. And you see that the car in the middle definitely has a dynamic shadow, like it's surrounded by these other cars and the headlights cast a dynamic shadow. It seems though that these two persons standing on top of the car don't cast shadows. Could also be the perspective or so, but I would expect it to look a little bit different. It seems that some people standing at the sidewalk are casting shadows while others don't. It's a bit inconsistent, could be to the amount of lights that are there, and this has like some unpredictable effects. I would assume though that only certain people cast shadows and the others not, again to save performance. I also think that these two women dancing on the car are the two women we see in the next scene. For whatever reason, there's also this quite colorful reflection on the ground around this car. I'm not 100% sure why that is though. Let us skip ahead a little bit and we see some of these funny social media videos, and one is quite interesting. That's the one with the guy driving his red truck in a very interesting way. And here we see that the wing or side mirrors are actually reflecting what is in the background. And it seems like there's an explosion or something going on there. I'm not 100% sure. But as soon as the camera changes the angle a little bit, we see the door being reflected. And there, the green paint of the door has also a lot of noise all of a sudden and looks quite a bit strange, I have to admit. Also, the car paint has this little noisy effect as well. Not sure if it's like this effect of the car paint or if this is like a noise effect of ray tracing or something. It's definitely interesting to see. There's also another scene where we see the rear mirror and the wing or side mirrors as well with the reflection in it. So it's not just for the scene. It seems to be a general thing, which I think is pretty cool. Let us skip ahead a bit with the scene with the mud. And there are some very interesting details in this. First of all, we have all these reflections in this muddy water there in the background. It might be that some very far away objects are not reflected correctly, but I think most of it looks pretty accurate. So that in of itself is already nice to see these ray traced reflections here everywhere with tons of detail and so on. Also, the ground looks pretty awesome, but I might be wrong, but it looks a bit like that the guy in the middle leaves a footstep in the mud, so it deformed. That would be also pretty impressive, to be honest. And also when this other truck gets into the water from this right side, then you also see how the water has little waves and deforms as well. So in of itself, like a lot of interesting little details that you can see here that just make this look really realistic. Then let us skip ahead again a little bit to the scene where for the first time we see Jason, the other protagonist of GTA 6. And then we see a lot of police cars going in the other direction. And what is interesting here in this particular scene, besides seeing the other protagonist, is that the wing mirror reflects the other police cars correctly. So here we have the other scene where we see these mirrors working. So that's again a pretty nice detail in my opinion as well. And then on the co-driver's seat we see Lucia again. The next scene I found very interesting was the one with Lucia and Jason in the grocery store. I already mentioned that the bottles in this game look really good, and here in this shelf to the right it really shows in my opinion. This scene, if you stop it, looks almost photorealistic, and that is very impressive. If you look very closely, you see that some of the bottles are not casting shadows on the shelf and so on, so there is definitely still room for improvement, but you have to look definitely twice to find those little details. Of course, the use of motion blur might also help here a little bit. Speaking of motion blur, in the next scene we see them driving away with the car very fast. And maybe it's a motion blur, maybe it's a mixture between motion blur and the YouTube compression. But the texture on the car looks a little bit blurry at times and also at the side here and there. But as said, that could be just a combination of both these effects of motion blur and the compression. The texture work in this game so far looked really stunning and solid, especially on the characters. Speaking of which, we see them in the next scene in a room, and we learn that it seems they are in a romantic relationship. What is interesting in this scene, I found very noticeable, is the picture in the background. It has a lot of structure on the picture itself, but also there's a lot of detail on the picture frame, which I found kind of surprising in this scene, that there's so much detail. But I guess in a scene like this, you want to have all the details in the foreground, and then maybe in this case you have this depth of field in the background, so it's very blurry there. You can maybe hide some inconsistencies in the blur, and then the scene just looks really realistic, because those things in the foreground just have so much detail on them. Very nice shot, very impressive to see. And then after that comes the final scene of the trailer, where Lucia kicks in the door and they start this robbery on this grocery store. I think that connects to the scenes we have seen previously. And then the trailer ends. At the very end of the trailer, we also get the hint that it's coming 2025. I assume it will be the fiscal year 2024, which ends in April 2025, so it could release in the first quarter. If it doesn't get any further delays, who knows? Maybe they need more time, and Rockstar is a studio that can completely afford delaying this game if they feel it's not perfectly ready. But we will definitely learn more about it when we get closer to its release, I guess. What is also not surprising, but unfortunate, is that it's only announced for PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series S and X. So PC players know what this means. We might get it like half a year or more later, which, as said, is very unfortunate. This could of course also mean that we only get it 2026 on PC, but hopefully by then GPUs are again cheaper and more powerful on the market. As a result, we can actually afford a computer that can run this game at a high fidelity, maybe even at like 4K resolution. We will find out. I would assume on consoles, because of all the ray tracing features that we have, they might target 30 FPS, at least for 4K resolution, and then we have to see what the performance mode might be capable of or not. But usually Rockstar is very capable of optimizing their games in a way that they run pretty well. You have to keep in mind that GTA 5 ran on a PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360. The PlayStation 3 has like 256 megabytes of RAM, and Xbox 360 at 512. That is very little for a game like this, but it kind of worked, I guess. Nvidia also announced that their next generation of GPUs for consumers will be out in 2025, most likely, they said, and that is maybe an interesting coincidence or not, but we will see how this might affect this game, what the next generation might be capable of. However, this game looks insanely taxing due to the high graphic fidelity. I'm very curious to see how it will run on consoles when it comes out. I'm actually impressed by how good this game looks, and though there are also some other issues I might have with GTA 5 directly, for example, I always felt like that often their design of missions did not really develop much further compared to like GTA 3, Vice City, San Andreas, and GTA 4. Like, it always felt like there was like a formula they were using for their mission design and so on, and they just repeated this. They perfected it more and more, and what they did is definitely great. But if you have played, like me, basically almost all the other GTA games, you definitely noticed, well, I kind of have played this before. I would love to see them maybe trying out something new, innovating a little bit, maybe trying to get some of this into a slightly different direction and make the missions more interesting. If that is even the right word. I'm mainly meaning with mission design, the way what you do in these missions is not always, but very often very similar to stuff you have done in previous games. And I would just wish for a bit more variety there, if that makes sense. For example, what I liked about Cyberpunk 2077's mission or quest design was that you often had multiple different ways of solving one, and this created variety in the gameplay. Of course, Cyberpunk is more an RPG than GTA, so they can't use the same approach, I would assume, but I would love to see them also trying to find something new or finding a new approach how they might design their missions, resulting in more variety in gameplay. And this brings us to the end of the video. If you found this remotely useful and are still listening, maybe press the like button, subscribe, and also leave me a comment. How did you like the trailer? Did I miss something? For sure I did. Also, what are your impressions on the visual fidelity shown in the trailer? If you're interested in more games content, I look later into the 2.1 update for Cyberpunk 2077 that adds a ton of new stuff like a metro system, boss overhaul, new motorcycles, all kinds of things. So we look later into this. I'm not sure if I make another little overview video or review of that as well, or if I just stream it here on YouTube and on Twitch. you will find out for sure. Also, the topic Game of the Year is coming closer and closer, and I definitely want to talk about this as well, so expect some gaming content in the following days. Huge shoutouts to all the people supporting me in all the different ways. Thank you for that. And I would say, see you people next time. Goodbye.